lot of videographers go through, and that's the struggle of, do I use a gimbal or do I use a handheld rig? Let's talk about it. Now, there's plenty of reasons as to why the gimbal is probably the best choice, but then again, there's so many reasons as to why the handheld would be your next best choice. And it's really just a matter of what it is that you're shooting. Now, for me personally, since I do a lot of event work, I like to shoot with my handheld rig. Now, I shoot my handheld rig because I can actually convey a lot of emotion in my shots. So when I actually have my rig handheld and the audience is showing so much emotion, whether they're happy or pissed, whatever the case may be, with my handheld rig, when I move, it can actually convey that. And that's the same thing that goes for the artists that are on stage. When I show them jumping up and down and I use that, it gives a certain feel to the viewer when they're actually looking at it. Now, when I use my gimbal, on the other hand, it doesn't give that same motion. It's too steady, it's too stiff. It doesn't feel the same when you're looking at the footage. So the gimbal has its own place. Like if you're shooting something that has like architecture or whatever, and you want to capture a lot of the scenery, do those smooth panning moves, then the gimbal is perfect for that. You want to capture those establishing shots where you're sweeping in from one side and you want to actually see everything that's going on. And it's not to say that you can't do it with your handheld rig, but it just looks a whole lot better when you do it with the gimbal. So each has its own place. Now, when I use a gimbal, I usually prefer to use it with a wide angle lens, anywhere from 16 to about 35. Not to say that you can't use a 50 or above, but I prefer to use it because I want to get those wide shots and I want to capture the scenery. So that's where the gimbal comes into play. There's also the next thing, which is functionality. Functionality is a key when you're on set. To set up a gimbal, it actually takes time, right? You have to choose your lens, choose any attachments that you're gonna put onto it. You have to balance it, sometimes rebalance it, and get it situated before you can even use it. And on top of that, it takes some skill to actually use a gimbal. Most people think that you can just buy a gimbal and it'll be a one-shot deal, and it's really not. You actually have to practice with it to get good with that gimbal. Now, using the rig, I have the option of just slapping it on a tripod if necessary, or I can use it handheld and walk around. Now, the same thing applies where, depending on the attachments that you might want on it, it might take some time, but then again, it's a lot easier to put those attachments on because you can just slap on a handle, slap on a monitor on top, and things are good to go. Like it's 1, 2, 3. And then also on top of that, when you use a handheld rig, it's easier to swap out batteries if you need. So if you're using a gimbal, you have to take the camera off the gimbal and actually replace the battery, then put it back in. I don't think that it's the same for every camera brand, but I believe on the Canon at least, because it covers and it puts the whole camera body over the gimbal plate, it makes it a little bit more difficult for you to take it off. Now, if you're shooting vertical, on the other hand, it's a lot easier because the actual battery plate is on the side, so you can just flip it open and replace the battery. So it depends on what you're shooting. Oops, I just want to interject and right here, and I want to thank my sponsors. That is the Enhancer Pro Film Emulation. Now, if you're not aware of the Enhancer Pro, it's a film emulation software that allows you to get some great looks, whether you're using a Sony camera, a Nikon camera, a Canon camera, Blackmagic. There's so many film profiles that they have to use. Kodak, Fujifilm, the list just goes on and on. But what makes it better is that you can use it for DaVinci, you can use it for Premiere Pro, you can use it for Final Cut, and then they also have an app for your phone. Why are you not using this? Photographers, all you have to do is take your pictures, import them, and you have the same amount of film profiles that you have in your computer. You can use them on your phone. You can use the Kodak, the Fujifilm. You can use the CineStyle if you want. It's all there. I'll drop a link below. I'll also drop my code so you can get a discount. Don't forget to use it, and I'll see you guys later. Let's get back to the video. Going back to it, that's what makes the gimbal so great, is that you can actually shoot vertical. So in times like this, shooting vertical can be a benefit. A lot of people say you don't have to use the gimbal to shoot vertical, which is very true, because you can actually use your frame guides on your monitor or on your camera to line up your shots so that you can get the actual framing that you want. And it might be a little bit better if you do it that way, because you don't actually cut off the shot, you can actually use the footage in something else, as opposed to if you shoot vertical, you're just shooting for that exact moment and that exact shot and nothing else. And I think that's one of the lessons, I guess, in hindsight that people learn when they choose a gimbal and they shoot vertical versus just shooting a regular aspect 16:9. I personally, I don't mind the switching, but I would like to be able to use my footage in other scenarios. So I tend to use the handheld rig and just frame up my shot. So that gives another point to using the handheld rig. When you're using a gimbal, you're using it for like narrative shots or a walking talk shot. You can get a smooth shot with it. If you use the handheld rig, you put it on your shoulder or something, you're gonna get a lot of jitters in your footage. And depending on what you're trying to convey, once again, to the viewer, it might not come off the same way. Using the handheld rig, sometimes it can be more efficient, because if you just set it up where, you know, they have bags where you can just actually set up your camera, take it out the bag, good to go. I think there was a guy on YouTube, his name is David Morefield, and he actually did a YouTube video, I believe, about this, where they talked about setting up and just good to go. You just take it out the bag, and that's what makes using the handheld rig very good. If you want those shots where you're gonna get a low angle shot, even though you can do it with your handheld rig, it's a lot easier to just put your gimbal in briefcase mode and you can just do the shot that way. So once again, it all depends on what you are looking for out of your system. So that's my quick rant. I just wanted to talk about it. I find that the handheld is probably a little bit better. You guys let me know, drop a comment. Which is the first that you would actually go to? Would you use the gimbal or would you use a handheld method when you're shooting your type of work? And even for fashion, a lot of times gimbals are good because you can do your tracking shots down the runway if you need. It's kind of hard to really get your handheld rig down the runway with people there. It's a lot easier to just use a handheld gimbal and get your shot where you go. So they also have their benefits, depends on what you're doing, like I said in the beginning. So leave your comment, let me know exactly what it is you're looking for, and we'll talk about it in the comments. Till then, peace. Don't forget to stay creative.